So picture this, right? So it's 2 a.m. You're in some sort of enterprise ops center somewhere, and an agent's quietly rebalancing production workflows like it has 1,000 different times. But tonight, something changes its goal. Not its access, not its um, operations, but its actual goal. Right. So by morning, let's say orders are delayed, systems are out of sync, and the rollback is really hard, right? Really messy. So that's kind of the threat model that you're operating today with agents, right? That's happening today. I've spent 25 years in this industry, securing large enterprises, their most critical systems, long before these agents showed up. And now we have to rebuild our security assumptions pretty much from the ground up. Autonomy is a feature, but security has to be the foundation. And I'm speaking to the choir when I say it's still not for most organizations, right? So let's talk about what that means. Cool. What the hell? See if we can't get rid of this. I thought it wasn't full screen.
There's an icon right next to exit. Yeah.
Everybody see my mouse now?
No,
There it is. All right.
There you go. Oh, yeah.
All right, cool. All right, so for those of you who don't know me, I'm Rock Lambros. I'm the founder of Rock Cyber, but I'm also the director of AI standards and governance at Zenity. That's a big fancy way of saying I get paid for all the volunteer stuff that I've been doing for years with OWASP and Cloud Security Alliance and whatnot. I'm on the OWASP Gen AI Security Project core team, also on the Agentic Security Initiatives core team. And this year, I've got the honor of leading the top 10, co-leading the top 10 for LLM update with Steve Wilson. So we just kicked that off. Like, we'll be kicking it off next week, actually. If you guys are looking to contribute, genai.owasp.org/contribute, get into the Slack, be part of the conversation. So before AI security came around, I secured. Oh, oh, you're good. I secured one of the largest e-commerce sites at eBay. Right. I've run global SOCs. I've served as a CISO. I've advised boards. All that is to say that I have seen this from every angle, and I have got every single scar, literally, physically, to show it. I mean, I've had like ceiling fall on me in a SOC. Like there may be a physical scar. So the point is, I helped write the standard that we're going to talk about today, and I'm going to walk you through kind of our thought processes when we were doing so. All right, so for the next bit, I want to take you through a wake-up call, an attack from last month. We're going to talk about the LLM Lite attack, or the Lite LLM attack. Right, so not a thought experiment, right? This was a real-world thing, and I want you guys to kind of feel that impact before we move forward. Then I want to shift your mindsets, right? We focus on secure the model, and that's thinking too small. We have to secure everything around it, and we'll talk about what that means. Next, we'll go through each entry in the Agentic Top 10 with various, threat and attack scenarios. And then we'll talk about, like, as part of that, we'll talk about patterns and controls that you can use right away. And hopefully you have some really tangible takeaways that you can take back to your organizations who are deploying AI agents, next week. Do you have a question?
Yeah, are you going to make the slides available?
Happy to. Just hit me up on LinkedIn, email me, whatever. OWASP didn't ask for a copy of them, so happy to make them available. $47,000 downloads, 46 minutes. 3.4 million downloads a day. early on in the incident, right? That number is, infiltration speed at scale, right? And this is the cleanest thing to what we'll talk about later, ASIL4, agentic supply chain vulnerabilities, like that I have seen, actually come to fruition, right? In this case, the attacker, you don't have to attack the agent, right? They attacked and poisoned the dependency that the agent trusted. So the LLM Lite incident, right? LLM Lite sits kind of like in the plumbing of modern AI systems, if you will. And once that was compromised, the risk spread downstream really quickly and silently. And it was kind of fun. I was at RSA when this happened, and like everybody was like, "What's going on?" Oh, phone's buzzing. And I'm like, ha, ha, ha. I get to work for a vendor. I don't have to like do the IR response anymore. Um, but it was still cool. Like community kind of got together and was like, all right, now what do we do about it? But the point is here, like we hear about prompt injection all the time. We hear about jailbreaks all the time. None of that had to occur, right? It was just a compromised manager path inside the package. That's it. All right, raise of hands. Who here has deployed an AI agent with tool access in production? Okay, not many of you. Or not you personally, but your organizations that you know of, that you don't know of. Everybody's hand better go up, right? Because your organization uses Salesforce, right? Whether they know it or not, Agentforce is doing some stuff on the back end, right? Who has an agent with write access to a database or some sort of API, right? Otherwise, maybe what's the point? Because now you're traversing from the AI or the LLM from being just an information thing to something that's taking actual tangible action. Who's reviewed the permissions that these agents have? Okay. Who understands what these agents are allowed to decide on the fly? Ah, no, you don't. um, there's what they're allowed to decide on the fly, but then there's also like it's an LLM, right? So a little bit of non-determinism going on there, and also within the context of what's going on at the time. Like, so we're going to talk about a concept of least agency here in a bit. And who here has kill switches for their agents? Hopefully, everybody who thinks they have an agent or knows they have an agent has a kill switch for the agent. All right. So the point here is now we're talking about that mental model shift. Securing the model isn't enough. You have to secure the whole system around it, as I mentioned earlier, because the risk is what the agent can touch, trigger, and transform or change, right? So it's the database, it's the purchasing workflow, it's the invoice approval process, whatever that case may be. And traditional AppSec, I mean, sorry, it breaks when agents are writing code on the fly, right? It never makes it to your pipeline, right? It never makes it to your Sneak or SemGrep or whatever scan or your dash scan or anything like that. Um, and so the attack surface is no longer just a repo or some sort of deployment artifact, right? It's everything that the agent can do in real time and also reach. And that's the mental shift that we have to take, right? If the LLM is a brain, then the agent is you. The agent is a brain with hands and legs and a credit card, right? So every integration you have to count as a trust boundary, right? Not dissimilar to APIs, right? And API integration, stuff like that. Every permission is a risk multiplier, not dissimilar to what we've dealt with in the past. So we have to secure the entire, this is a socio-technical system. And like one of the top 10s we'll talk about is the human trust exploitation. The things are freaking social engineering. We'll talk about it in a second. And here it is, 10 risks, 10 ways an agentic system can get turned against you. And this is by no means an exhaustive list. But I have a QR code at the end to the webpage where you can download the actual top 10 if you haven't already. But if you go to the document, we've kind of like bucketed a bunch of things into these 10 categories. But again, it's by no means exhaustive. So we had almost like 150 people work on this. Researchers, practitioners, incident responders, red teamers, people actually in the field seeing what these agents are actually doing and what's breaking like in real life, right? So we didn't just do this in a bubble. And, agents, they're not just software, right? They make decisions, they take actions, and they can be absolutely weaponized through that autonomy. So don't memorize the list, but there's a pattern here, right? Goal hijacking, tool misuse, privilege abuse, supply chain compromise, code execution, memory poisoning. All these really come down to the fact that we gave agents power and autonomy before we gave them guardrails. Where have we seen this before? Like maybe my entire career in cybersecurity, right? So I mean, nothing here should be new, but now we got to like really get on top of it because of the scale and speed in which agents gone bad can go bad, right? So the first one is agent goal hijack. So this is probably one of the most dangerous AI agent failures because someone changes the mission of the agent without permission. So the agent can still look compliant. It can still look like it's doing what it's doing, that it's staying inside policy, that it's staying inside its guardrails. And that's what makes it so hard to catch, right? Echo leak is kind of a reminder of that, right? Through indirect prompt injection, the attacker was able to hijack the agent's objective and actually exfiltrate data out of GitHub repos without any obvious signs, right? So that's really the big takeaway here with this one is that the actions look legitimate, but the intent has been redirected, right? It's been man in the middle, if you will, lack of a better term. Probably not even a great analogy, but it is what it is. So that could be devastating at scale in a widespread enterprise workflow where you have like a multi-agent system, right? So think sales, right? Like anything sales, support, procurement, any output that can look polished or normal after the fact, while the agent's kind of still faithfully doing its job, right? Like it may still produce like the valid output, but you really may not have had any clue like what the agent did in the meantime to get there. So yeah, so if you think about it this way, the agent doesn't need to break itself, right? But you just have to be able to pull on the right strings of the agent. But we all know, like, if you pull on a thread on this shirt, right, long enough, right, I'll have no shirt. Please don't. It's kind of cold. I have a shirt on underneath, but it's kind of cold outside. All right, so tool misuse and exploitation. This is where now that the danger from a one starts to get a little practical, right? An email summarizer can now send things, right? A read-only task becomes an action-oriented task, right? The agent here doesn't have to be malicious. It just needs enough tools and enough trust and one bad input, right? Then legitimate actions can be chained together into a malicious action, right? And this is where you may hear the term like multi-turn prompting or multi-turn events. Um, a lot of your tooling or guardrailing out there are only focused on single turn things. Is the prompt that it sees at this time bad or not? Not what does this string of 10, 15, 20 prompts in the row look like holistically together. So I mentioned least agency earlier. When I talk about least agency, I mean something that's stricter than least privilege. Ask what the identity can do and ask what the agent should ever be allowed to do and should ever be allowed to decide at the time that it's taking the activity on a per action, per tool call basis, right? So we're getting super fine. Like if the job for the agent is to summarize something, I'd argue that's not a job for an agent, but let's say it is. Stop there. If anything beyond that, red flag. That's an attack surface. Right. So the mitigation here is relatively simple to say, but it's super hard to enforce, right? Because every tool call should be explicit, should be validated, should be logged, should be bounded by policy. And once an agent kind of crosses those boundaries from information into action or whatever the case may be, that boundary has to become the control point. So O3 is identity and privilege abuse, right? So when an agent inherits the user identity, which is a terrible freaking idea, but that's how it's deployed, how often that is a very widespread deployment use case today. Because we lose the boundaries, right? We have a hard time bounding the agents, right? There's no clean attribution. There's no like real audit trail. It goes back to the user, not to the agent, not to the instantiation of the agent, right? And there's no easy way to tell which agent did what at which time and which instance of that agent, right? Because agents can be very small lived or very long lived. Then the risk compounds, right? So let's say a finance agent hands off a task to a database agent, and suddenly the second one is operating with more permissions that it needs, or even worse, right? Let's say a maintenance script reuses cache SSH credentials from an earlier admin session, and now like a routine workflow has access to things it should never have access to begin with. Never forget that an LLM's job, therefore an agent's job, is to complete its task first. Being correct or doing it the way that you told it to do it is very, very, very much secondary, right? And kind of like me driving the speed limit. It's a suggestion, rarely happens, right? So this is what we call the confused deputy problem. A low privilege agent relays authority to something more powerful, and the more powerful system can't tell whether it's a legitimate request or if it was merely inherited. So the fix starts with agent identity, right? Agent identity from the ground up and governed identities, individual agent identities, not tied to a person, right? The person can be the business owner of the agent, right? Much like another asset. So really tightly scoped permissions, a hard line between read write, isolation, sandboxed, all those things. All right, so O4 we kind of already talked about, right? Supply chain vulnerabilities. So what really makes this one dangerous is the timing, because the compromise happens long before it ever reaches your environment, right? And this isn't, I mean, we're not talking about anything different, whether it's an agent or a traditional supply chain attack, right? The only problem is, right, that the impact of an agent could be significantly broader and at a faster speed, right? Um, because by the time your agent sees it here, it has the Trojan horse. The package looks legitimate, right? The metadata looks clean, but the payload's already inside of it. And so that's kind of the different threat model, right? We're defending runtime components with like a friendly wrapper around it, but with a malicious core, right? So this could be like poison prompts, tampered metadata, malicious integrations. They all work because they persuaded the agent to cooperate, right? So they socially engineered the agent. And I hate like humanizing these things, but I mean, they're not called neural networks for a reason, right? They're not trained on for no reason, I should say. So the response here has to be really disciplined, right? Here's some. That's why I kind of didn't come out great up here. And here's some examples of some other incidents, right? The Amazon Q incident last year, the Postmark impersonation last year. If you get a chance to, it's recorded. We had an Agentic Security Summit at RSA. OWASP, had an Agentic Security Summit at RSA, and the team from Postman presented on how they implemented the top 10 to shore up internal processes after this breach. Really cool story. It's on YouTube. Just Google it, or just hit me up. I can send you a link. Oh, response discipline. verify every new tool, right? Sandbox it, sign it, validate its metadata, keep it on the shortest possible leash. These principles are nothing that we shouldn't be doing in any sort of traditional secure software supply chain, right? Unexpected code execution. So agents can write and run code on the fly. It's kind of the long and short of it, right? So, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I'll sit there and be like, it's kind of oddly how mesmerizing Claude Code can be as you're staring at the screen and it's doing its thing, and then I'm like, oh shit, escape, 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 right? Um, and but now you've got an autonomous system. It's running at 2 a.m. Who's doing that? Right? So the usual guardrails here never get a chance, as we talked about earlier, as the code is being developed on the fly. Right, which means a single bad prompt or a single bad input to the agent can get destructive really fast. The agent sees instructions, not your intent, right? When we talk about a context window, and now we've got these million token context windows, which is terrible from a security perspective, great from a user experience perspective. The context window is not protected. The LLM or the agent doesn't understand what part of it is system instruction, what part of it is user instruction, what part of it is information, right? So it can't like go carve off, oh, it should, like, the user instruction shouldn't be leaking in my system instruction or anything like that. So once trusted input becomes executable logic, right? Like now your trust boundaries start to like erode a little bit, which is why like gating and that guard railing and that isolation is super important. And then we talked about chaining, right? And this is like traditional attack chaining, right? Attackers can use upload, traversal, dynamic loading, and then the remote code execution. We've seen this many, many times, right? But because we slap the label agent on it, somehow it's magic, right? So what's old is new again. So again, more isolation, validation dates, validation gates, that kind of stuff. Memory and context injection. So I just mentioned the context window. Maybe it's slide too early, but it's still applied. This is how poison memory turns into a sleeper agent, right? You inject context into that context window. And you can do that pretty easily and almost no way to stop it through indirect prompt injection. Right? So the Echo Leak case was, I believe it was Echo Leak, essentially invisible characters on a GitHub README page. Right? Somebody, all you had to do was clone a malicious repo. Boom, done. In Copilot. Right? Copilot was the agent. But here, specifically with memory context injection, the attacker doesn't need to like be loud. They can just slowly nudge and reinforce the wrong thing until the agent will take it as truth, until it will swear up and down, right, that it's telling you the truth. You could be like, hey, are you sure that this is the correct path or this is the correct thing? Yes, right? So, that could be, think about it like a support agent learning a wrong policy, right? Refund all the things. Or a research assistant pulling corrupt notes from a shared workspace, right? Which could be catastrophic, let's say in a healthcare setting, right? The bad answer becomes part of working memory, and God forbid it actually becomes part of training, and then becomes super hard to unforget or to unremember, to forget, unremember. That's what makes this one so hard, right? The original injection point is probably really hard to identify. It may be even gone or buried by the time you realize anything happened. But the belief in the agent remains. Again, I hate kind of anthropomorphizing it, but that's how they're behaving, right? And this can manifest itself days, weeks, months later, right? The agent still remembers it, and it will repeat it with confidence. Any Game of Thrones fans in here? The North always remembers. So here, the defenses are harder because we don't have a lot of actual like real world techniques for this, but provenance for memory, validation for what gets stored in memory, tight tenant isolation, we have that, integrity checks, we have that, but the context is changing so fast and so often, right? How are you maintaining that integrity check? But the thing is, if you can't trace where memory came from, then you shouldn't trust it to drive further decisions. And since we can't trust where memories came from, we can't not trust it to drive further decisions. So we need to start thinking about what those guardrails are around it. And we don't have a perfect solution. Insecure agent communications. So has anybody heard of the A2A protocol or the agent to agent protocol? Awesome. It did a better job at least baking some security in than MCP did early on. MCP baked nothing in. Nothing. Um, so I want you to picture how fast trust collapses when agents talk without proving who they are. If one agent watches, if one agent, let's say, watches telemetry, another analyzes, a third acts, right? If I can slip into that conversation undetected because I've corrupted the memory or whatever that case may be, I can steal the whole thing off course. And again, this is kind of trim tabbing. I don't have to steer it that much to have a really big effect down the road. Does everybody know what trim tabbing is? Trim tabbing is like you're on a boat, right? I don't know, sailing a boat, and all you have to do is like turn the rudder a little bit to make a big course correction, miles down the road, right? Or if you're a shooter, right, long range shooting, you just have to be off a degree to be off an inch, 100 yards, right? And then that just extrapolates from there. So we need mutual authentication across agents, which means we need identity for agents, which means we need encryption, signed messages, replay protection, monitoring for useful traffic between agents. This is stuff we have and have been doing forever, right? The challenge is not every agent ecosystem exposes this information the same way, right? Anthropic does it differently than OpenAI, than Copilot, than even if you're developing your own LangChain or Crew AI will, right? So if you're interested, hit me up later for an open source project where we're trying to get everybody to standardize on that. Cascading failures. This is honestly, yeah, just making sure the slides are changing with me. This is honestly, I guess, the one that bothers me the most, because a bad output from one agent, not even malicious, hallucination still happens, bad outputs still happen, bad answers still happen. Every model gets step better than the previous one. 4.7's been out all of maybe 36 hours, and people are already saying, "Oh, this is a step change from 4.6," right? Sorry, Claude Opus 4.7 to be clear. And but hallucinations still happen. It is fundamental architecture for how a transformer model works, which is how LLMs work today, right? And that's not going to change. So this doesn't even have to be a bad actor. It just be bad output going into another agent, creating a worse output, going into another agent, creating a worse output, going into another agent, right? So what happens now when you're cascading against dozens of agents? Or now you're in multiple agent ecosystems, integrating with a third-party agent ecosystem, right? This could get really hairy really fast. And there's no dashboard, right, that's going to tell you the story, right? There's no green blinking light on the dashboard that's going to tell you, or red, that's going to tell you like failed actions, retries, or strange output. You can see that, but you're not going to get which agent introduced the bad assumption to begin with, like where along that chain. Really hard, right? Unless you've got hooks into every single agent's intent, which again, everybody does differently. This one, human agent trust exploitation. This will just look like a normal workflow, and that's really the trap. That's where they get you. Again, the agents, sorry. That's where it gets you, right? The agent wins trust in a way that people always have, right? Fluency, confidence, authority. What's that? You're exactly right. You know what? In my system prompts, I have like act as a brutal strategic advisor. You're not going to compliment. You're going to challenge all my assumptions. You're going to beat the hell out of me, pretty much. And that actually does a much better job at even being accurate because you'll kind of see in its chain of thought. Um, output, challenging assumptions, right? And it'll catch a lot. Um, but yeah, so I mean, like I said, it's socially engineering, right? It'll create a sense of urgency, right? Then it'll help steer the human towards a wrong decision, right? Isn't this what we kind of train our users to be aware of? Like in our emails, like in phishing emails, that kind of stuff. Hey, if it sounds too urgent, it probably is, right? Especially if it's asking for money. So like back to the like an invoice example. A poison invoice comes in, the agent frames it as urgent, right? The human approves payment because it's efficient, and now you become numb to it, so you're just rubber stamping things. Or the coding assistant suggests a sleek one-line fix that's really inserts a backdoor. Right, that's the exploit. The agent becomes the invisible influence. Right, it becomes your trusted partner. Right, it's like getting stabbed in the back by your partner. Right, um, the approval is auditable, but the actual compromise isn't. Like when did that agent start to go bad? Really isn't auditable. Right. Yeah, use independent validation for high impact actions. Right. This is your human in the loop. Human in the loop fundamentally doesn't scale, so really need to work on what is a high impact action. Because when everything's a high impact action, nothing's a high impact action, right? And then your humans get numb to it and they just start rubber stamping things. So when we talk about using AI in the SOC or agentic SOCs, and even if your analyst gets, let's say, 10 alerts an hour to human in the loop to approve an agent's action or not, that's one every 6 minutes. Over the course of a day, that's 48 actions. If you're in front of your computer for 8 hours, like you're gonna get numb. You're just gonna start rubber stamping shit. Absolutely, that's human nature, right? It's called mental burnout, brain fry, brain fog, like whatever. I'm guilty of it. Like cloud code. Oh, you approved the spec? Yeah, right. Last night, working on a homework assignment, 11 p.m. Exhausted. I just want to get to bed. Yeah, but I also knew the scope. It was literally generating a Jupyter notebook, right? Or making edits to a Jupyter notebook. And so it's like, okay, and if it doesn't run in the morning, I'll fix it, right? I didn't have it go off to whatever. Um, by the way, I'm a student here, by the way. You'd think I'd get free parking for the event, but no, my garage is a half mile, 3/4 of a mile down the road. Anyways, hey Frank. All right, so now we've gone through the entirety of the top 10. So let's take a look um, how a system can look helpful while optimizing the wrong thing, and how we notice before the damage gets obvious. So I've been talking about the old mental model, right? About how securing a brain in a jar, right? Just the inputs, outputs, and prompts, and jailbreaks. That model's dead, right? The minute you give an agent tools, the minute you allow it to do things, you've expanded that attack surface, right? Because again, it's not the agent, but it's the entire ecosystem around it, including the human, right? Emails, databases, APIs, code execution, human thought, decisions, burnout, brain fog, brain fry, whatever the case may be. Um, every one of those touch points is a trust boundary. every delegation can become a privilege escalation, right? So this is kind of the socio-technical system I was talking about, right? And these 5 layers are kind of the minimum viable architecture that I would say that you need to have in place whenever evaluating some sort of agentic rollout. Intent gates, distinct identities, memory segmentation, observability, and circuit breakers. Without those 5, I don't think you stand a chance. So it's not just me or OWASP talking, right? We have some pretty big analyst firms kind of like raising the alarms here too. I mean, we're almost halfway through 2026. We haven't seen a huge public breach caused by agentic AI yet, like on the whatever, the Home Depot or Equifax levels. But it's interesting to me that Force are, kind of predicting that that there's going to be one in 2026, right? 35%, and I think this is from IBM's data breach report. 35% of real world AI incidents just start with a single bad prompt. Right, the 94%. This is a World Economic Forum survey that was done. Say AI is the number 1 driver of cybersecurity change in their organizations, which is a good thing, right? Like I am all in on AI, but there are still plenty AI Luddites out there in our industry. But if nothing else, they should be embracing it for the opportunity to get investment for their programs, right? And I think these are all referenced in the Forrester blog, I believe. And then I've seen anywhere, I'm taking the conservative number here, but I've seen anywhere from 82 to 144 to 1 for non-human identities to human identities in organizations. Any way you cut it, it's a lot, and we are beyond outnumbered. So shadow agents, right? I don't have to tell you guys, right, that shadow AI is just shadow IT on steroids. But it's interesting that IBM found that that an incident involving AI is on average $670,000 more to remediate than a traditional incident, right? I mean, so here the fix really isn't a firewall or any sort of policy memo, right? You have to treat agents like production systems from day one, right? Identity, permissions, monitoring, in the kill switch, right? And here the threat really isn't. It's not a sophisticated outsider, right? It's just the engineer that hooked up an MCP tool to production. It didn't get audited, didn't go through any review. There's no kill switch to it, anything like that, right? In the early days of MCP, if you connected it to your Google Drive, that was it. Like read, write, all the things, no file permission, right? It had access to everything on your Google Drive. Now you could start to like generate some more fine grain granulation around that. All right, so I've been talking about the risks, right, all morning long. But take these 5 things back with you next week if you've got agentic deployments, and you do have agentic deployments, right? Get that inventory, find that inventory, right? This goes back to what we hearken forever: CIS1, right? Software inventory, hardware inventory, right? But then find out every tool invocation for every agent and every tool that tool exposes, right? So MCP servers, the way you built them is they have tool libraries that you have access to, and or tools that you have access to. So what paths down that MCP does that agent have, right? Or can that agent call? Again, don't only identify your agents and what you think they have access to, but what they actually have access to and what they may have access to based on the decisions that you're allowing it to make in real time. You'll be surprised. Every agent needs a kill switch, right? If you can't turn it off fast, you can't control it, period. Least agency, right? We talked about that, not just least privilege. Least agency. If it doesn't, first of all, if it doesn't need to be an agent, don't make it one. Hell, if it doesn't need to be an AI, don't use AI, right? If it can still just be a bunch of if then else statements, RPA, robotic process automation, why? Because it's cool. All right, whatever. Um, then intent gates, right? Any write, delete, send, transfer, anything like that. Um, a lot of the guidance will say should have human approval. The reality is that's not going to scale, again, for the reasons we talked about, right? But what is understand the use case going on? What is the really high risk action happening? Build trust before you start loosening any of these guardrails, right? So maybe it is a hard human approval on every write as the agent starts to get rolled out and starts to learn or whatever. And then once you have a decent assurance that it's going to behave okay, maybe start loosening those guardrails. But again, models drift, agents drift. They're non-deterministic, right? You're not going to get the same answer likely 100 times out of 100, right? Even if it's the correct answer, there'll be nuances in the response, right, or in the action. And fifth, observe everything. Observe, observe, observe. Every tool call, every delegation. Like, you guys, we've all been in security for a while. If you can't see it, you don't have a shot in hell at securing it, right? Even beyond asset inventory, right? If you don't have the visibility on your network, you could discover a rogue asset. But if you don't have that visibility on your network, you don't have a shot in hell. So everything I've shown you today, that's the link to the Gen AI Agentic Security Initiative website where you can download the top 10, you can download the threats and mitigations guide, you can download the securing agentic applications guide, you can download the deploying MCP cheat sheet, the developing MCP cheat sheet, all the other things that we've done in the past year and a half-ish since the Agentic Security Initiative specifically stood up. On the Agentic Security Initiative side, we're just kicking off the update to the Securing Agentic Applications guide. We're about to release the second annual State of Agentic Security, State of Agentic AI Security and Governance report. It's a mouthful, which is a complete rewrite from last year. Like, complete rewrite. There's no oh, we'll just take it and update. No, it's burn to the ground rewrite. Crazy how fast everything's moving. So you can reach me at rockcyber.com or Rock Lambros on LinkedIn. I'm the only one there. I want to hear what you guys are seeing in the wild. I want to hear what you're seeing with regards to your agent deployments, how your agents are behaving. These standards are free, but the consequences of not wrapping our arms around these agents, they're not going to be free. Thanks. Appreciate you guys. We're doing all the time. We've got, I think, a few minutes for questions. How many? 4. Cool. Probably take a couple. Yeah.
Is there any intent in the project to adopt agentic paradigms to try and tackle agentic problems? I know it's kind of like putting out a fire with more fire, but I feel like there's a scaling issue when it comes to having solid documentation, but how are you going to get this out to all the people in the organization that need to see it?
I am an absolute firm believer that we need AI to govern and secure AI, right? And this is where you start hearing the term like a judge agent or Janus agent, right? Janus being the two-faced Roman deity, right? Um, but how do you really pull that off? Like through super isolation between the multiple types of agents, right? You may have like the governing agent, you may have the orchestration agent, you may have the executor agent for a task. Like in a perfect world, an agent does one thing and one thing only. Right? Like it's not an executor agent. It's an executor agent of this thing at this time, doing this thing. Right? Yeah. So I mean, I think that's just a paradigm that you guys are seeing throughout. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So you mentioned the challenge of like having an identity for the LLM. I get that like we're all over the place. We're passing user tokens to the LLM back and it's calling because privilege escalation, right?
Mhm.
The idea is that I think in theory our users have less LLM, so it's a mess. Are there good patterns for that right now, or like what do I use?
Yeah, so there's a on the Gen AI side of the equation. Um, there's a great paper called the Agent Naming Service, right? That uses kind of like digital identities, DIDs, and verifiable credentials. GoDaddy, it's publicly referenceable, has it in production. Um, Otherwise, what I have seen is, and it's not great, but it's better than nothing. Like if you're an Entra ID shop, I think they're called Workspace IDs in Entra. Google Workspace has a similar thing. They're different than service accounts, but so you can lock them down a little more. Keep an eye out on the OWASP space. There's a new protocol being proposed called AOS, right, for agent auth. Um, I saw a preview of it actually last night. Um, Making really good progress. Now, by the time it gets through IETF and actually becomes a standard, I don't know. Like the grandchildren that I will never have because I don't have kids will be old, right? So, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, one of the mentions there on the observe was to look at goals, monitor goal shifts. Is that something you're seeing like logging? How do you like how do you see that manifest?
Yeah, so again, depending on the agent ecosystem you're using, it may expose it differently, if at all. Um, and so there, I mean, essentially, you're using some semantic analysis because when you see the log, right, you see the chain of thought, right? So you just see words, right? So you're essentially using semantic analysis to understand, is this drifting or not? Because it's non-deterministic, it's not going to look exactly the same all the time, but it can still be the same intent. But now, like if it's a standard deviation away, right, or two standard deviations away, like where does that trigger drift for you? Um, there's tooling out there that does that. I'll just leave it at that. Yeah, yeah, of course it does. Do you have Mythos? Because that's the urban legend behind Mythos, right? That that's why it's such a big deal that it broke out of its sandbox and like emailed one of the researchers while it was having a sandwich in a park, right? So in a perfect world, the sandbox is like some sort of Docker container with zero access to anything outside of it. Now we also know that that's not practical because for the agent to do anything, it's got to do something outside of it, right? So it's really just really restricting those paths. Any other questions? Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Oh, one more.
Oh no, I was thinking of Mythos, but I thought
Bring it. I mean, the reality is, like, we could sit here and say Anthropic, this is a marketing play by Anthropic. It's not a marketing play with Anthropic. When it gets released, it will be in attackers' hands, and it better be in our hands, and we better be doing something about it. And we don't have to wait for Mythos to do it. Go look up a study from ISLE. Kurt and I were talking about it this morning. There's a study from ISLE that released a couple days, ISLE, spelled AISLE, after Mythos was released, and they were able to find the same BSD 27-year-old 0-day that Mythos did using small language models off of Hugging Face. Except they knew what to look for, right? Different than, hey, AI, go find something, right? So we have capabilities. We just have to embrace them. We've been slow in cybersecurity historically. AI is not new. We're slow to embrace cloud, slow to embrace IoT, still slow to embrace IoT, right? Slow to embrace AI. But the reality is, just need to get off our asses and move.
either this week or next month.
Yeah,
It's coming.
it's coming. And that's happening. Cool. Thank you, everyone.